Some assets do a better job at generating sales than others. Which asset is most closely related to sales? It's going to be inventory. And so a more specific measure of the efficiency of using assets to generate sales is going to be inventory turnover. And inventory turnover is equal to, now typically with a turnover, we're going to be using sales in the numerator, but because sales includes that markup, we are going to use cost of goods sold in the numerator. And we're going to compare cost of goods sold to the average inventory balance. So again, if we had net sales in this numerator, we would include not just how much the inventory becomes sales or how many times a year we sell our average inventory, but also that markup of inventory to the sales revenue or the sales price. This just gives us a cleaner measure of how well we're selling our inventory. All right, and let's look at the inventory turnover for our two companies. Walmart has inventory of $490, sorry, cost of goods sold of $490. $142, and an average inventory balance of $55,734. So how many times a year is inventory turnover can be explained as the number of times a year, because we're looking at annual cost of goods sold per year we sell inventory, or the average balance of inventory. And for Walmart, this works out to be 8.8. We sell our average inventory balance about 8.8 times. It doesn't tell us much, but once we can compare it to that of another company, it'll become much more informative. Cost of goods sold for Costco, $212,586. Average inventory, $17,279. Of course, these numbers are in millions. This gives us an amount of 12.3. So clearly Costco is selling its inventory much faster. And of course, the faster we sell our inventory, the more we're capturing our gross profit. The higher gross profit, the higher our net income is going to be. Oftentimes, analysts will adjust inventory turnover to turn it into the number of days in receivables. Sorry, the number of days in inventory. How long was our inventory at our company? The less it's in our company, the faster we're selling it. The faster we're selling it, the less capital or cash that we have tied up in that inventory. So number of days in inventory is equal to 365 divided by our inventory turnover ratio, or 365 divided by cost of goods sold divided by average inventory. So it's just a way of converting our inventory turnover into something a little more understandable than number of times per year, but we're going to turn our answer into how many days on average is the inventory in our company waiting to be sold. Okay, so if we take for Walmart 365 divided by the 8.8 inventory turnover, how many days is Walmart's inventory sitting around? 42 days on average. Okay, so we know this is just, both numbers are just been divided by 365. So we know that Costco's number, if 365 is divided by a larger number on the denominator, we know we're going to get an outcome that is a smaller number. And of course, we want our number of days in inventory to be as small as possible. Our ratios that we saw before, inventory turnover, total asset turnover, we want to be higher because it's how much we're selling, how frequently we're selling our assets, but number of days in inventory we want to be lower. And this works out to be 30 days. Okay, so an extra 12 days on average that inventory is sitting at Walmart. Next, we're going to look at another measure. This one is less related to profitability and more related to liquidity, which is the receivables turnover. How quickly are we collecting our receivables or accounts receivable turnover? Accounts receivable turnover, net sales. Sales is what drives our receivables. Of course, our receivables are those credit sales that we have not collected in cash yet. Sales are for, in this case, we're looking at annual for the year, so divide that by the average accounts receivable balance. Average accounts receivable, of course, is going to be net or net of the allowance for doubtful accounts. Remember that allowance amount is the estimate of the company the company's estimate of how much receivables do we expect will never be collected. Once we know it's going to not be collected, we write it off. As we're estimating the allowance, we're recording bad debts expense. This is the balance after our estimated uncollectible, or in other words, this is the amount of cash we expect we will receive in the future. Let's look at receivables turnover for Walmart and Costco. Walmart has accounts receivable of net sales of 642, 637, and on our denominator, the accounts receivable, 8,365. And this works out to be 77. So what is this telling us? The number of times, in this case the year, because we have annual sales as our numerator, number of times the company collects its average receivables balance. Of course, the higher the turnover, the more we're collecting it, so the higher the better. Remember, so far, all of our turnover ratios, the higher the better. All right, and for Costco, we have net sales of 242, 290, and average accounts receivable balance 2263, and this works out to be 107. So who's collecting their receivables faster? Costco is. They're turning over them, collecting them into cash better. So we would say that Costco has greater liquidity or efficiency in collecting its receivables. Some concerns that a company might have. Let's go back to the inventory turnover. Some concerns with inventory turnover is too low or days in inventory is too high. What's the problem with this? This can lead to obsolescence. Our inventory is no longer as good as it was when we first purchased it. We can think of computer companies, their equipment, their inventory not being sold because it becomes outdated. We can think of clothing companies, clothing going out of style and not being able to be sold. We can think of things maybe if it's like a grocery store, we can think of things not becoming usable anymore, damage or waste. So we want to sell our inventory as quickly as possible. Also, if we have our inventory sitting on the floor in the stores for too long, this is capital tied up. Capital or cash tied up in inventory in an unproductive way. And then let's also look at those receivables turnover. Our receivables turnover, what's the downside to having receivables? A turnover that's too low. We're extending credit to customers that are not paying us. So our credit policies are too liberal and we need to revisit it because we know when we don't collect our receivables, we have bad debt expense, and that bad debt expense is going to reduce our net income. Similar to how we converted the inventory turnover ratio into the days in inventory, we can also convert our accounts receivable turnover ratio into the number of days that our receivables are outstanding. Call this our days in receivables. And this is what you would expect, 365 divided by the accounts receivable turnover ratio, or 365 divided by net sales divided by average accounts receivable. Okay, so let's look at what these numbers look like for Walmart and for Costco. For Walmart, 365 divided by this accounts receivable turnover ratio of 77, which equals 5. And what this tells us is the days in the receivable, the average number of days until those receivables are collected. Okay, 5 days. That's not much. And that's not surprising. How many people don't pay for their goods at Walmart? And if you're thinking about credit cards, that doesn't actually count. Credit cards are accounted for as cash because it's the credit card company that's taking on that risk and is immediately, as soon as that credit card is used at Walmart, the credit card company immediately gives the cash to the company. And then it's really between the customer and the credit card company that has that loan outstanding. It's not Walmart waiting for the cash. So what would be in here is if you use a Walmart credit card. Costco, this really would just relate to Costco's credit cards, or if they have some customers that are not individuals, maybe a business customer that might do business on credit. 365 divided by the accounts receivable turnover of 107. This works out to be 3. So of course, if the receivables turnover for Costco is higher at 107, it must have a lower number of days in receivables.